Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sunday Nights with Faye Seidler. It's Faye. It's Sunday night. We're talking today about news. Sorry, I'm a little bit later today. Just had a lot of different things I had to get done before 10. So just kind of getting into our news tonight. Community Options has a free winter clothing voucher for lower income homes. There's a lot of different things for qualifying for that, but I want you to know it's an option for anyone who might benefit from it. I also want you to know that the Night of Hope video that I had originally aired on November 20th, the Transgender Night of Hope that came after Transgender Day of Remembrance, is now on YouTube. The full video is there, so some of the stuff I wasn't able to include during that night is now on there. As we come into more difficult times for transgender individuals, it's important to frame some of the hope and reason that we should continue to be here tomorrow. So please share that with anyone who you think might benefit. While it is focused on trans people, just keep in mind that if it's hopeful for trans folks, it's probably hopeful for quite a lot of different people. So feel free to share that with whoever might benefit. Speaking of trans folks in general, I actually have a couple of stories that came up all together, so I just want to go over some trans news for you. France recently released a healthcare guideline that effectively said that care for trans individuals is well-researched, evidence-based, high quality, and that they will be looking at guidelines for providing hormone therapy for youth or puberty blockers, all the stuff that might be appropriate. This is in line with American medical associations, every one of them, for the care that trans kids need. It's unfortunate we continue to see trans care politicized by politicians with no medical background because the evidence of it is very clear and we have decades of it. This is something that we've been researching since the 1950s in America and 1919 across the world. It's something where we understand that for kids, trans kids, to have any quality of life, providing care is the best avenue for that. It's tough for trans people and trans kids in particular. After the elections, there was a 700% increase to call centers from trans youth. And it's important to recognize that the political rhetoric that we have that is so anti-trans has an impact on our trans kids, because why wouldn't it? It's making them scared and frightened, not into being not trans or scaring them into being straight, so to speak, but it's just scaring them. I wrote a letter to the editor about Bleeding with Compassion. It talked about the Turning Point event that was hosted at NDSU that featured an anti-trans speaker prominently known, and it reframed about how we can think about and talk about these events. I also have a section on my website now dedicated to thinking about problem solving if there are people that are trying to have more of an extreme conversation about this or extreme political rhetoric that often ends up hurting minorities, especially our trans and queer minorities. Just recently, Montana Supreme Court did uphold a ruling disallowing the ban on trans individuals across the state. It's kind of good news in that the reason that they did that was privacy laws, not necessarily trans issues. Keep in mind, none of the things that we decide in court about trans rights have to do about medical certainty or medical research. Judges are not doctors, usually. It's about what rights states have. And a lot of times states give tremendous rights to privacy, to parents, to individuals for medical autonomy, and those rights do apply to trans people and trans kids and families of trans kids. That's why it's hopeful that our lawsuit, Gender Justice's lawsuit in North Dakota, will overturn the ban that we had in play for medical care for trans kids. This ban does nothing but hurt these kids and put them at risk of suicide and harm, and it's unclear how many kids have already been impacted or lost because of this legislation. We will find more about that next month as it officially goes to court or trial or whatever you might say about that. But in bad news, as the political rhetoric and kind of extremism continues to rise against trans individuals, we recently did have the House passing a defense bill, that's our major military bill, nearly $1 trillion, excluding trans kids specifically from it, making sure that our veteran or active military individuals, I guess, can't help their kids out and can't support them through serving our country. There's a lot of things I can say about that, but it honestly feels petty. Like, not even grand disagreement or anything like that, just petty and mean to do that. And ultimately, it feels like a show of political power more than anything else. What is notable is that many Democrats did sign on to that, so it's a nonpartisan issue to hurt trans kids at this point, but hopefully that changes in the future. As much as I talk about a lot of the negative stuff within this, even as we understand the condition of being trans, as well as the medical necessity of transitioning and the authenticness of being trans, there is a lot of political will that is there to hurt trans people in particular. That said, there is a lot of hope too, and we have a lot of trans kids born into families that will love them and try to keep them safe. That's something that we didn't have 10, 20 years ago, and it's worth keeping that close to your heart as we continue to move forward, that we are still better off than we ever were, but we still have challenges today to overcome some of the cultural stigma, prejudice, and barriers that we have for kids, trans kids in particular, to actually live good lives. So hopefully that's something that we continue to work for. I definitely will. Segueing into our politics section, if you want to get involved and talk about some of these things with your lawmakers, the League of Women Voters has a 101 advocacy training that covers some of the legislative involvement coming up in our session in just 2 weeks now. So you can check that out. Another helpful reframe is that Tri-State Transgender, a local group that helps trans folks, is looking to help trans individuals move to Minnesota. As scary as some of these bills or political rhetoric that is aiming to hurt minority groups is, there are still places where trans people can be safe and find refuge, and Tri-State's helping people do that. Moving topics, we get to talk about veterans, and there is a lot of great resources for veterans available, largely from a newsletter put out by the Fargo VA, and I'm sharing that here. The newsletter goes out monthly. You can sign up for it. You don't have to wait to see it on my show. You can just get it to your inbox. There was recently a major suicide prevention training for our vets that was put on, awareness and education around resiliency for those in our armed forces. So that video is also something you can access on my weekly report, which has all the stuff I talk about all of the time. So if you're ever like, Faye, that's a really good stuff that you put out there, how do I find it? You go to my weekly report. You don't even have to watch my show. You can just go to the weekly report and you'll find it there without listening to me, if you want. Or you could listen to me, that's fine. But I'm not gonna like speak out loud websites, so you do have to go there if you want to find some of this stuff. In other good news, poverty seems to be decreasing in North Dakota, according to data from the North Dakota Compass. I think that's cool. I'm always cautious because it seems like even if it is decreasing, a lot of people in the state are having trouble. But the main reason I want to share the story and highlight Indy Compass is they're just an incredibly great wealth of data for our state. They are where I get a lot of my migration data from, and I look forward to their newsletter every month. It's actually one of the best newsletters. It's really informative and like engaging and kind of cute. So I just like getting it. Even when I'm like, oh, I don't want to do another email. Like I start looking at their newsletter and kind of cheer up. If you like data, it's like maybe the best data newsletter in our state. So it's really a story about Indy Compass more than anything. In community news, C.S. Hagen, one of our amazing reporters, put together a history of gay community in 1984, where he went over some of the history of the gay community in 1984, but centered around the story of a grenade being thrown into one of the early gay establishments that we had. It wasn't a live grenade, but it was a threat. And talked about some of the culture and history of how we treated LG plus individuals in this area at the time. As I said earlier in the segment about trans individuals and kind of where we are now, we still are not getting grenades thrown at us. So like we've gotten somewhere, and I think we are seeing a lot of growing pains of people starting to really tackle things like gender identity, things like trans individuals or trans care. This is really new to a lot of people, even if it's not new to us or the medical community or culture at large, or and small, I guess. It's still relatively new for a lot of people. A lot of, let's say, parents of kids just heard about this in the last 5 years, maybe 10 years, depending on how well connected they are. And you're going to be a little cautious if this seems like a completely new thing that just happened. So as we warm up to this and we see more success stories of trans kids transitioning, being happy, thriving, or unfortunately the reverse, where they are not able to and don't make it, we are going to become more aware of the need of this and more comfortable with it. In the same way that it seemed unthinkable to accept gay people in the 1980s, it's a lot more approachable today. And I think that in another 10 years, it will not be as a big deal as we're making it. In fact, most kids think adults are being very silly about all of this, and it's actually pretty easy to understand. So we have hope in the future. And then finally, I just want to showcase a 24-hour daycare opening up in Fargo, for no other reason than it's a super needed resource. Childcare is huge, a huge need in our state. If you follow news on what our state needs, childcare is one of it. So it's really great to have that, especially non-traditional hours available, since there's a lot of families that work non-traditional hours. So that's an option. That's all I have for our opening news. I just have one story segment after this. It's actually going to be covering Tony Bender, a journalist who we had lost a couple of weeks ago now. I actually put this together 2 weeks ago. I just haven't been able to put it up here because it's a longer video and I had other things that came up that I had to do first. So it's just kind of looking at my feelings about losing someone who really stood for journalism in this area. As much as people will typecast me as like an LG plus focused person, that's actually not even the majority of my content. Like LG plus content is a big part of it, like a third or like 40% or something like that. But I cover a lot of different things. And I have to work on the trans issues or queer issues because almost no one else in our state really is. But for things I care about personally, journalism is a big one. Like I thought I was going to be a journalist when I was growing up. Always super respected and honored the estate of journalism, our fourth estate. And I often feel like I hold back my idealism when talking to journalists here because I know that it's tough. There's so many things you have to contend with and make compromises over in the modern world. And it's hard to rock the boat too much when if you get fired, well, there's maybe one company that really has a lot of the news in this area and there's nowhere else to go. I do my best to make life easier for journalists instead of being very critical or demanding more because I understand that. Though in my heart, I'm very idealistic and I try to carry those standards with me in the stuff that I do. I don't try to make the claim that I'm unbiased with the stuff. Like I have things I care about, obviously, but I try to be fair. And I think that there is a distinction there that matters. I try to be as fair and balanced trademark as I can be. And I just trust people understand there are things I do care about. But I never sacrifice, let's say, quote unquote, the truth to gain something. I care about leading with integrity. And that's why data is so important. Such a big background for me is because that is how I lead with integrity. I also try to be an educator and a teacher. So I rarely am trying to say, you must think this, but rather here's information for you to think about. So while I haven't gotten into journalism, a lot of how I apply myself within education and the data sector is journalistically. So I don't know. I have a story about that coming up. Thanks for joining me tonight. We're getting to the holidays. I don't really plan to take any days off, so I'll probably be here next Sunday and Sunday after that, and then legislative session. So if you want to be more involved, just message me, like get involved. I will figure it out. But yeah, that's what I have tonight. Thanks for joining me. Have a good rest of your night. Well, if you haven't heard yet, beloved columnist Tony Bender passed away just a week or two ago. It's unclear even now, I think, exactly what was cause of death, but people speculate it was related to a cancer that he had and overcame a couple years ago. There's been tributes to him from a couple of our renowned columnists in this area, as well as individuals expressing lament that he's no longer here. Tony was known for being more of a liberal writer in North Dakota, and Mike McFeely's tribute to him talked about him being the voice in the wilderness. But I think it's important to know that he wasn't just an ideology. He wasn't just a political party. He definitely leaned left on social issues. But he was pretty well respected across our state as someone who lived here a lot of their life, who cared deeply about our region, who cared deeply about our rural community, and wrote from the heart. If you loved or hated him, he was himself. He was honest. He was full of integrity. One of the unfortunate things about his passing and the time of his passing is that he resigned from the Forum just a couple of weeks before he died. And his last Facebook post is him saying he resigned. I think there are a lot of people who will stop seeing his column, who will hear that he died and assume that that's why. But he left the Forum out of protest because of their policy to censor national discourse from our local columnists. The ways Tony was a hero to me was as a journalist, as someone who put his voice out there and instilled all the values that I hold journalism to. I often hold back because I know I'm too idealistic. I know that my job is not impacted when I ask journalists to dig deeper than just covering the coats of both sides, when they have sensational articles that don't have a lot of substance, when they don't really cover stories in a way that seems equitable or like they care about the truth. It's not my job that's lost if I really dig into what old school journalism used to be, so I really hold back and I try not to be too critical, and I try to just thank the journalists who do their job every day. Still try to push for journalism to be better. All of my heroes turned out to be journalists, and I found that out later in life. Like Kurt Vonnegut had a background within journalism, Terry Pratchett had a background within journalism, and those are two of my central figures of how I want to be a person and a writer and contribute to the world. The stories they told gave me lessons to be a person. And when I think about Tony Bender, I always thought about Terry Pratchett, kind of an older, whimsical guy that just really stood for having heart and being funny and being satirical. Like it wasn't just being serious, because to really have heart, to really care, is to have the capacity to make jokes, to make fun of ourselves and each other, because if we can't do that, we can't really listen. I think a lot of the tragedy of losing Tony is that there isn't really a other person to replace him. There isn't really someone that's submitting satirical, uh, goofy, irrelevant, heartful, sincere pieces that has us questioning things. And I think a lot of people were looking forward to having that voice in the next couple of years to feel centered and feel safe, to feel like there was someone out there that cared and was sincere and genuine and could still try to make you laugh in dark times. One of the first times that Tony recognized me or my writing was an article or an LTE of mine I submitted that was the choices LGBTQ plus youth make. And it was a LTE looking at how queer youth don't choose to be queer, but they do choose who to let in. And it was a reflection on trying to make places safe enough for our queer youth to let people in, to let them know who they are and what they're feeling. And he submitted that and talked about how it was a piece full of heart and a piece that cared and a piece that mattered. And he compared it to another article, I think it was Roxanne, it could have been someone else, that was very much not that. It was very much myopic and hateful. I reached out to Tony in 2023 and I asked him, how do I be better? It was a 2023 legislative session, an onslaught of bills are happening. I knew that people in my community were afraid and scared, and how do I be better is just kind of the feeling I had, because it's like I felt like Tony was a person who could tell me that. Unfortunately, he couldn't. What he said was I was doing fine, basically. He said he liked my tone, he liked what I did, and I had a running joke with him that was basically he would sometimes get people that would insult him with like 5 or 6 adjectives, and I was just like, that's impressive. I hope I can get there. I usually get 1 or 2 adjectives at most. So it was just like, the real height of my career will be when someone gets creatively insulting for me. And I told that to him. He's like, yeah, well, you have a case of you have like a chronic issue of likability or something like that, which was kind of fun. Um, I don't think I had a close relationship with Tony, not really. Not in the ways that I know a lot of people probably did. I didn't have decades of experience with him like some people did. He wasn't my boss at a paper like some other people. Um, but he's still someone I valued and appreciated and respected. I think that North Dakota is a worse place with him not in it. And I think it puts the call for us younger people to step up into that role. And for us to remember that even in the life we have, even in our very divided, very hyper-partisan world, you can still be out there in rural North Dakota and you can still just be silly and whimsical and serious and irrelevant and all these things because they're not contradictions. To be human is to be all of that, to express the totality of our emotions in every way we can, to show people it's okay to be human. That was his sincerity, that was his approach, and that was his writing as being human above everything else. I hope I can bring that into my writing. I hope I can bring that into the work I do going forward. If you know my work and you're not just watching this as a tribute to Tony, or if you don't know my work, Tony will be someone I always carry with me, someone I always remember and always think to as one of the legends that existed during the time I was alive. We all pass one day. We pass hopefully when we're older, and we hopefully leave some legacy of the things we cared about and valued. And I will carry a piece of that legacy with me. And whenever I end up dying too, I hope that that continues. That's what it is to be human and to be alive as we grow throughout our lives. And adults like me and other people right now, we're going to grow into elders. We lost Tony, but there is a generation of people here who will keep on going. And as we fade away, then our kids today will be the adults that carry on our torch. If there's any solace in all this, is it's always been this in our life. And by all accounts, Tony seemed to have lived a very long life and accomplished a lot of what he wanted to. There are a lot of people who want to be writers who don't get as far as Tony did. And to have his voice out there, to be respected, to have people talk about him all across the state, in whatever way they do, is nothing short of incredible. It's nothing short of magic to see the impact we can have on people. And while Tony was a big figure, we all have that kind of impact on each other in big and small ways. I don't know him as well as other people, but what I would say is if you want to carry his legacy forward, then try to be as human as you can. Try to write a little bit. Try to submit an LTE. Get your voice out there. Be a journalist. Go to school. There's a program at UND right now for that. Join the MSUM Advocate and their new grassroots thing. The more people that fundamentally care about everything, the world, the future, generations. I hope there's better send-offs. I hope there is I'm kind of sad that he didn't have like an obituary going that's just like a bunch of like funny jokes, because I feel like that would be in his style. Maybe I'm wrong. But I hope that there is something that becomes a biography. And until then, I know he has a book, and I'll probably try to find it, probably try to read it just to honor him. I do that with people. I try to find something to honor them, because I think that when we honor the people we lose, it sets a precedent that life does matter, that we're not just perpetually moving forward and moving on, but life fundamentally matters, and we need to take a little bit of time for it, to appreciate it and process it and then carry it forward. So I don't know if this is a good tribute. I don't know. It's not the bigger ones I've been doing this month or anything, but like, I would say thank you, Tony, for being someone who could be a role model to me in this state, and a role model for the kind of person I want to be as I get older. Well, thank you everyone for watching my show. That's all I have for today. I hope you have a good rest of your week. I hope we see you back here next week. Just want to give some thank yous to all the folks here who contributed to the show, who made it all a great time and informed us about the cool stuff they're doing. He will be my outro probably for a while until I choose to change it. You all have a good day. Bye.